Adelaide, Boston this evening. The University of Adelaide's business incubator, based in the Riverland region, which supports local startups and businesses to innovate and grow. And Adelaide, Boston is part of an international network of business incubators located in Singapore, New Zealand, and of course in Adelaide. First up, I begin by acknowledging the First Nations people of the Murray and Mallee region as the traditional custodians and First Nations people of the land on which we meet this evening. And I pay my respects to the elders, past and present, and extend that respect to the First Nations people who are present here this evening. A big welcome to our audience, to you who have joined us here in person, and of course for those of you who are online. I know we've got quite a significant audience online. And a special welcome to the Honourable Nicola Centofanti, who's here representing the constituency in Adelaide. Before we get started, I'd like to thank and acknowledge the support of the South Australian Government's Department of Primary Industries and Regions, supporting Adelaide and Boston, and we couldn't do without their help. They're the instrument that actually made all this happen here. So a big thank you to Kirsten. I'd like to also welcome our panelists today. You can see them sitting up in front of you. And we have one of them here, Ben, who's from the local region. And the four others, Ben's on the end, and then the four others have driven up here from Adelaide. So we've got Ben Kent on the end, and then we've got Tanya, Dr. Tanya Jane, second. We've got Graham Hull. We've then got Manjula Disneyaki, and then we've got Sarah here on the end of this ceremony. I'll tell you a little bit more about each of our panelists in a moment. But if I can just say why we're here this evening, we're here to talk about technology. Adoption of technology can mean many things to many people. And this can range from thinking about a functional website and using cloud-based accounting, right through to automation, including robotics and drones and deep tech, such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and blockchain. Whatever the size of the business or the sector in which it operates, for successful digital adoption, business owners need to understand how technology can impact their businesses and how to leverage it for success. To really flesh out these issues, I'd now like to introduce to you our panel who are experts in a range of areas, including artificial intelligence, software development, app development, and ag tech. First up, and in no particular order, we've got Ben Kant, who's a third-generation grower, packer, marketer, and exporter of citrus. Ben spent 15 years running a modern pack house in his family business, which supplied both major supermarket chains and export markets, including those in Japan and China. Ben was previously on the board of Riversun Export, the single-desk agency for Australian citrus exports to the USA. Now, at the end of 2017, Ben's family orchard was acquired by the ASX-listed Costa Group, after which he took up the role of citrus supply manager for the Costa Group. Ben's an alumnus of the University of Adelaide. A big welcome, Ben. Next, we've got Tanya, Dr. Tanya Jane. She's co-founder and CEO of Examini. Tanya is a science and technology enthusiast and has a PhD in genetics from the University of Adelaide. Tanya and her partner Adrian were the winners of the university's 2020 Adelaide E-Challenge, which is a pre-accelerator program for their first product, HoneySense. These days, Tanya and Adrian continue to grow their company, focusing on a platform for accelerating workflows with artificial intelligence. Next, we have Sarah Hibbard. Sarah is the Chief Commercial Officer at Consilium Technology, a leading AI company solving some of the most difficult problems facing the defence, agriculture and mining industries. Sarah has recently been involved in developing and executing the strategy to take Consilium Technology's ag tech products to market. Sarah is a registered psychologist and holds a Master of Psychology, First Class Honours in Psychology, a Bachelor of Laws with Honours, and a Bachelor of Science from the University of Adelaide. Next we have Grant Hull. Grant is a digital strategist and he's CEO of the digital innovation firm Enabled. Under his guidance, Enabled has grown steadily and is now working with iconic brands, multinationals, as well as entrepreneurs from around the world. Enabled's mission is to understand human needs and address these by using the latest digital technologies. Graduating with honours in business information systems and advances in human-computer interaction, Grant survived the dot-com bust. He leveraged the spreadsheet of broadband and grasped an early mover advantage in smartphone and touch technology. And then finally, Dr. Manjula Disanayake holds an academic research and teaching position in innovation and entrepreneurship at the University of Adelaide's Adelaide Business School, where he's also the Associate Head, Learning and Teaching. Manjula has designed and facilitated many business accelerator and pre-accelerator programs, including the eChallenge. eChallenge is the longest running pre-accelerator program in South Australia, and indeed I suspect it's also in Australia. Manjula has founded highly successful technology startup companies, one of which was acquired by Symbol Technologies, now a Motorola company, in 2002. Would you please welcome our panel here today, ladies and gentlemen. They're a fantastic group and they've got a lot of experience, and so I'm looking forward to hear what they have to say. So the format this evening will be along the lines of, I'll ask them some questions there, and after that I'll open it up to the audience. Unfortunately, those virtually streaming tonight, they may find it challenging to ask some questions, but we're happy if you want to send in some questions there, and if we can deal with them, we certainly will. But what I expect is that we'll go for about an hour here tonight, and we'll finish up around about 7-ish or so. So, once again, in no particular order, Sarah, can I ask you a question? Yes, I think that would be good, Sarah. Let me just hold this on here. There it is. Thanks. So, Sarah, can I ask you, can you talk to us about the importance of digital transformation and some of the reasons that digital transformations fail?
Sure, thanks Noel, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Before we talk about the importance of digital transformation, I think it might be worth just getting on the same page of what we mean by that. So for myself, I see digital transformation as the process of using digital technologies, and I'll explain there's a lot of different technologies out there to either create new or update existing business processes, culture and customer experiences. And the reason you do that is to adopt to meet business requirements that may be changing or changes in the market. And at its essence, what it comes down to is it comes down to creating new value, generating new profit and revenue, or finding increases in efficiency. And it's important, I mean, if you think back to 2020 before COVID, just as an example, what was being referred to as the retail apocalypse. So already a lot of stores were having to close because they were competing with online retailers in the e-commerce store. And what COVID did is it more or less accelerated that trend. And there's a little bit of a saying that if you're not doing anything, you're actually moving backwards, because a lot of your companies will be embracing these technologies that are available, and it's going to put your business at a lot of risk for any external threats. And we did see that. I mean, COVID is a very extreme example of those threats, but it did highlight the importance of being able to adapt and pivot. In terms of some of the reasons why digital transformations fail, there's a lot of reasons why they can fail. I was doing a little bit of research, and the stats vary, but on the whole, it's about 70 to 80% is the stat being thrown around why those transformations fail. Lots of reasons. A few, so for example, some companies will have a pilot project, they'll demonstrate the technology works. What they sometimes fail to do is think about how this is going to actually roll out to the whole company. So they've invested the resources in this pilot, they don't have the resources to actually create that fundamental change at the organisational level. Something I should say is, with digital transformation, it's not a one-off project. It is quite a holistic, centred approach that really should affect the whole organisation. If you've only got buy-in from one part of the organisation, it's going to be very hard to create that fundamental change. You more or less have a project as opposed to digital transformation. As everyone would be aware, adoption can be a big challenge, both internally, not getting that buy-in from internal stakeholders. Just because people are aware of the technology doesn't mean you've got that buy-in and you're going to get that adoption, which is where, I guess, change management principles are very important. And even then, externally, if you have a new technology you're taking to your customers, it's really important to get those early adopters on board because, as you know, word of mouth is crucial and they're going to be your advocates out there. There's so much that we could talk about on this topic, and I'm happy to talk to anyone afterwards as well.
Thanks, Sarah. And so, thinking about adopting technology or developing further technology in your business is one thing, but it's getting the people on board. That's where the major problem is, I guess, the bottleneck for failure. Would that be correct there?
In my experience, it's one of the things I've seen time and time again. A lot of focus on the technology, which we think of when we think of digital transformation, and not always a big emphasis on the people. And as we know, people are complicated individuals and people, and I think that's an area not to neglect because that more or less will determine the success of the transformation.
I'll come back and ask a question later, maybe of you or maybe the rest of the panel, about how can we overcome this. Sometimes people have a fear of embracing new things and technology, but I'll reserve that question maybe to later, and maybe the panel can talk about that, experiences and the like. But my next question is of Manjula. Manjula, can you tell me what insights can be shared on the technology adoption landscape in regional South Australia? Where do we sit there with technology, embracing technology in regional South Australia?
Thanks, Noel. I'll take a step back and explain where we started our work. And it started with two trigger points during the pandemic. One was in EdTech space, how the technology adaptation really got accelerated because we had no other choice. When it is a lockdown, when you can't have a face-to-face session, whether it's a school or the university, there was no other choice but to embrace digital strategies, and that skyrocketed around the world, not just in South Australia. That was one trigger point. And the second trigger point was, it was very interesting to see the technology providers, not just in South Australia, not just in Australia, but around the world, came forward and they gave very impressive, lucrative discounts, or most of the time for free as well. They made, especially software was being made available for those who are in need. So we thought, look, this is happening in the EdTech space. Why don't we look at, has it accelerated the technology adaptation across other industries? In urban, that's where we started, as well as in the region. And what we found out was pretty interesting. And actually, what I'm sharing with you today is the interim results, so to say, because the study is still continuing. But what we found as something very interesting for us to understand what the actual landscape is. First off, with the acceleration that we saw on the EdTech space versus what's happening out there in the region was very different. And in terms of explaining the regional technology adoption, I would want to explain two different actors at the outset. One, we can call them the technology providers, whether it's a small startup or an established big firm, a multinational firm. On the other hand, they are the regional, I would call them regional businesses, whether they are into agri or otherwise, right? And the good news is, if you look at a lot of the technology providers, I'm so happy to say that they had world-class technology. When I say world-class, I truly mean it. That means they are not second to any other technology that is around, whether it's Silicon Valley or Belarus Minsk or Sydney or any other part in the world. They were pretty good in terms of the technology in itself, the problem that it solved. However, on the other side, where the business owners, the regional business owners were concerned, there were lots of very interesting stories that we heard. Firstly, most of them have got burned by trying to adopt technologies, but for various reasons, as Sarah was saying, they have not been able to continue the new technology. It has died a natural death for whatever the reason. And also there were concerns about, can we rely on a new technology? What will happen if this technology would not be available, if this provider was not available in another couple of years' time? Would they gain unnecessary profits that we don't understand? So there were a lot of very legitimate concerns where the regional businesses were concerned in order to be, I think the word skeptical would be the right one, to adopt these technologies. So what I'm trying to say is it's very important to understand the reality of the landscape. I think both the stories are very legitimate because the providers, they came up with a problem and these problems were solved. So they have, in their view, done their part. And where the business owners are concerned, they want business continuity. They want to make sure that they can do more with less. It should make business sense in order to solve their problem and be able to dependent on this technology. And they were not pretty sure whether it will work or not. So rather than taking the risk, they would rather try to see whether someone whom they trust within their, I call it, their local micro ecosystem, that would give them the trust and the credibility for them to start the adaptation. So it's more like a chicken or egg situation, which I think is a great opportunity as well, because we have got something that has the potential. And just what is important in forums like this is to embrace how we can pass the threshold so that we can really see more uptake beyond the pilots that Sarah was talking about.
Thanks, Manjula. Manjula, can I ask, I mean, is there a difference, do you think, in the uptake in terms of technology in metropolitan areas, say in Adelaide, versus, say, regional South Australia? I mean, it strikes me that people in regional communities are very innovative. They stick together, they're faced with problems and they have to resolve those problems and embrace innovation. Does that carry through to embracing technology or not, do you think?
It depends on the background of the person that we're talking about. Definitely, there are lots of innovators as well as early adapters in the region as well. However, when it comes to certain complexities, to take a simple example, for someone who is pretty much into software, software is an area where it changes so much and it changes so fast. What is new and up to date today will be outdated in 1 or 2 years' time. And what that means is the keeping up with it is a challenge. So it's always good to understand what is it that each and every one of us are good at, and then to be able to partner with others, not really to see that's a provider, this is a supplier, but how can you establish good partnerships based on the strengths of each and every individual business organization.
And Manjula, one final question. So, Manjula, you started and developed companies in Silicon Valley in the US and sold and invested there. Is there a big difference in technology uptake, do you think, in the US compared to, say, Adelaide, to Australia generally? And what about little old South Australia here with us here?
That's a great question. So the simple answer is where technology in itself is world class that we see over here as well. However, as an ecosystem, there are some components that may not be, identical, and I don't think it has to be identical. Even within the US, there are lots of states that try to replicate a Silicon Valley. I think that's absolutely, in my view, the wrong thing to do. Each ecosystem is unique. And for me, in South Australia, the regions have their own differences, and I think what we should do is looking at what works in a given region to be our strength, and how can we treat the diversity to be our unique competitive advantage, and not to replicate some success that may not be replicable.
Thanks, Manjula. Thank you. I've got a question for Grant there. So, Grant, you work with a number of large companies in the app development area, amongst other things. But can I just focus on the app side of things? Can I ask you, when should a company think about embarking on building or developing an app, and how do you help them determine if they actually need one or not? There, it's a pretty broad question, but yeah.
I was going to say it's a pretty broad question,
Yeah.
Noel, and so therefore I could talk a long time on the topic. But if I try and contain it, I think I'd like to divide sort of software. I mean, there's apps and software, and I think probably everyone knows that they're an app user here. I don't think I have to survey the room. But there are certainly sort of two aspects of software that I think is really important to consider. One is a little bit more like infrastructure. It's kind of like your taps, and it's the plumbing, it's the gas work, it's what comes in, it's what you need, you switch it on, you expect it to be there, okay? So that's what a lot of IT and a lot of software can be. And if you're not using that, then probably something has gone wrong. But what we're talking about here, I think, Noel, is talking about how to leverage software more fully to your own advantage, because that sort of plumbing aspect of software is something that everyone needs, so therefore there's no advantage, there's no opportunity there. Whereas if you're starting to think about trying to do something different, then that's where some software might be an advantage to you. So plumbing aside, and then we move into this, because if you're just focusing on the plumbing, what you need to do is at least shift in and have a look at what the industry is doing. It's always good to survey what the industry is doing. Like Sarah said, and I think Manjula backed up, if we're not moving at least with the pace of the industry, then you're not standing still, you're actually moving behind. It's almost a relative thing. So you do need to keep up with what the industry is doing, and the industry as itself can even be a source, and I might talk about that a little bit later, the source of people being able to do something a little bit custom. But if you are just, again, still doing, you kind of housekeeping, it's a hygiene factor. Everyone now knows that we need to use the alcohol wash. It's kind of an accepted thing. So again, software, it's a hygiene factor. If you're just trying to get a competitive advantage by using what has become standard in the industry, then you're only going to be standard in the industry. Okay, so how do we then shift across? And if you think of software like layers, you've got a whole lot of platforms that are starting to come about where it's for the industry. Maybe you've got a generic platform, it tackles a number of things, you get a little bit of specificness to each of the industry. So if you're in agriculture, it might be a little bit different to what's happening over here in a different industry vertical, but maybe the same application like stock control or logistics or something like that. It's generic, everyone's using it. Eventually you get higher up the stack where you need to start to differentiate. And that's where, when you're identifying something which could be an advantage, which is unique to you, and that's where you've got to start to really think about your own software development opportunities. So unlike that sort of plumbing stuff, everyone needs to do it, you can, within software, start to do things a little bit differently. And the key opportunity is that you can start to even, and this is a question of, do you need to start developing something yourself, or do you need to engage someone like Enabled? There's a lot of tools out there now, even within the Google suite or even the Microsoft suite, where you can do things by hooking up just basic forms into spreadsheets and things like that and use that as a data source. And that's a perfect opportunity to start to sort of find out what's unique to you and start to take care of a couple of those key pain points that you might be experiencing that the rest of the industry isn't, because maybe unique surroundings and things like that. And as you go into that and you go further, then you start to realize the opportunity to say, hey, I'm deriving benefit from this. Then maybe you can go then and step in and think about talking to an application developer, someone like Enabled, whereby we can take what you're doing in a spreadsheet or a form by using a Google form. They're pretty easy to set up. You can send that into a spreadsheet. You can do data capture and things like that. So yeah, it is a broad topic, But when you're starting to really bump up against something, then that's an opportunity to think laterally and think how software can do it. Just one last thing I think I might say on this is don't be afraid to experiment. There's a lot of, if you do small scale experiments, that's the way to go about it. So stay tight, focus in on what problem you're trying to solve, and try and stay in that area without getting too lateral. And one of the reasons why I think that digital transformations fail that we've seen as well is, and we've been involved directly in this, we made a very simple application that was used by one company down in the Mount Gambier region to be able to track the flow of wood from, so it was essentially just doing one simple job, and that was to eliminate the paper. We kept it really tight and really simple. And yet all of these other larger companies, they were smaller, so they wanted to do something pretty tight and pretty simple. So we just made a simple app where you could start up essentially what was a paper docket, transform it into an app, and they capture that information. It's done on a mobile phone, which is not connected to the internet, because often within regional, especially within the forest growing areas, internet connection is poor. So you just store it locally on the device, and as soon as they get back into range, it sends it up into the internet, into the cloud, and then they can derive it. But it was really simple. And that one there stuck and stood the test of time, because there was a lot of other people trying to make essentially whole of management systems. Government were, like the government forest department at that point in time, were putting in big, huge tenders, building on platforms that were moving too slowly, building on Microsoft platforms that didn't exist within a year after they had started the project. So keeping it tight is another key point to being able to successfully do that. And now, interestingly, and here's an opportunity you can also think about on whether or not you should make your own software, that company now sells it to most of the rest of the industry to use, because it was the only one that remained and stayed working, because it was so tight and so simple. So that's probably just where I'd go with that journey.
Grant, a couple of questions I have. So the example you just gave with the company that moves wood, is that you were saying? So, you know, when I think of an app, it's something that for public consumption that, you know, that I want the public to buy into, and it'll help me with my business in terms of getting my message out and selling whatever it is I'm selling. But are you saying that apps can also be used for internal use only? Is that some of your clients?
Yes. So initially as well, this application, because there's one way of getting an application out there, and that is to put it in the app stores of Google Play and Apple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you can also now, there are pathways to be able to create custom apps that are used in-house within a single company, and you can essentially send them to the devices of the people that work for you. So yeah, they can be used for internal purposes, and there's some really elegant and excellent ways to be able to create simple applications too.
So this is going to sound like a stupid question, but are there particular types of companies that would embrace apps and some companies that don't? Or do you find, based on your experience, there are a whole range of different companies across a range of different industries? Like, I'm an accountant, are there accountants? Should they embrace apps? Should agriculture, people on the land, for instance, would there be a need for them to have embrace app development and so on?
Yes, well, I suppose everyone, I think everyone in this room probably sees the internet through the small screen of their smartphone device at any particular point of time. And there's really a blending between what is an app and what is an application on the website that you view through your mobile. Mm-hmm. So definitely, I would struggle to think of someone who isn't already using an app. Sometimes people don't actually realize they're even potentially using an application. Okay. So yeah, definitely anyone can use an application. And it's as simple as sometimes just hitting Google if you're not very experienced in that, and say an app for, or an industry apps, or the top 20 or top 10 industry apps within that. That's a good way to be able to sort of start that exploration process and find the things in the industry.
Thanks, Grant. Thank you. Look, next up, thank you very much. Next up, I'd like to sort of just move on to a little bit of a discussion around what I'd call deep tech. With maybe a bit of a focus on artificial intelligence, particularly as it pertains to the ag sector. And I'm going to start with a question to Tanya here. Can I ask you, Tanya, at what stage would a business want to start implementing artificial intelligence? Now, I know that's probably, the answer will be as long as a piece of string, but general guidelines there. When should a business think about AI, making AI part of its operations? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's probably no right or wrong answer for it.
Yeah.
And as you said, the answer could be very long, like some of the other questions could have been. I guess maybe one way is to take a step back, and everyone in the room might have heard of the term AI, but maybe not everyone knows what it means. So artificial intelligence is basically a set of pattern matching algorithms that a computer uses to try and learn and identify what's happening in the real world, sort of like a human would. So when it comes to a business preparing themselves for using artificial intelligence in their company, I mean, basically this can be performed at any stage of a company, from an early stage all the way through the business life cycle. But when I'm talking to somebody, a business for the first time, who maybe has some idea or has heard the term AI and is curious about it and wants to maybe use it in their company somehow, but they don't know how, there's a few questions that I might ask them first, which would be along the lines of, what kind of software and technology do they have already? Are they fairly advanced in that area? What kind of resources do they have? And then I might move on to a question like, in their business, are there any processes that are performed that are time-consuming, repetitive, tedious? And then of those processes, can they easily be performed by a human? So for example, if there's a visual inspection kind of task, could a human easily identify one thing or the other, and is that different between humans? So that's like a subjectivity thing. Those are the kind of questions I might start asking people when I first meet with them. But then from meeting a few people, actually, there's a few different things that my co-founder and I have noticed that we think are really highly key things that you might want to consider before considering implementing AI. And the first thing, which I think is absolutely the most important, which has sort of been touched on by both Manjula and Sarah today, is mindset. And basically, you have to have the right mindset. You have to have a willingness to adapt your current processes and workflows to implement an AI solution. It doesn't kind of just happen on its own, and it's a process that's very dynamic, and you might build something out with a company that builds an AI solution for you, or you might have to look through the landscape about what kind of current technology exists that you can then implement in your business based on what other people have built already. A lot of the time AI projects fail in a business, and that's not necessarily because the solution that was developed for the company isn't what the person needed or wasn't the best fit for that solution. A lot of the times it's because the people that are trying to implement these things into their company, they just aren't quite ready to adapt that technology to their workflows. And so that's sometimes why those kind of solutions fail. And another thing would probably be understanding your workflows and processes. So a lot of people here that own their own business would intimately understand the different workflows and processes in their company. But if you don't have a really good idea about what these things are, it's really hard to kind of see different points at which you could maybe implement a technology like artificial intelligence and try and improve efficiencies of that process. So maybe understanding workflows and processes in your company, or that your employees are doing for you, that's a really great way of sort of having some kind of metric to base upon whether AI is going to really improve efficiencies in your company or not. And that can give you some kind of measure. If you do implement some kind of solution, have you really gained that efficiency that you're expecting from that kind of technology? And then the third and another really important factor is data. And if you've ever heard the term AI, you've probably heard that AI requires data, and that's really true because computers can't learn on their own. They require lots and lots of data to try and learn what we learn about the world in their own way. And so when a business is starting to think about implementing AI, some of the things that they might want to think about is, how do you capture data? What kind of data do you even generate? Are you performing sort of visual inspection tasks? If you're doing that manually, maybe you want to start capturing that data on a smartphone or some kind of camera device, capture that visual data so that it can then be ready for AI at some point. Or if you're, generating a lot of text-based data, how do you store that? How do you keep it? How do you process it? There's lots of different types of data. So maybe you're capturing, numbers on a spreadsheet. Maybe you keep them in Excel or something. So there's a lot of different stages at which companies might currently be in of how they capture data and how they store their data and how they manage and process their data. So data is really important. And if you are doing a lot of manual processes in your company and you haven't really moved to sort of adapting and innovating your technology pipeline, maybe it's a great place to start would be to start thinking about how can you better capture data that could then be used for some kind of technology or some kind of digital innovation. So maybe you might want to invest in some kind of sensor technology or Internet of Things devices, or maybe you want to talk to a company that consults on AI or technology to sort of help you understand what's the best way to get your data prepared and ready to then really drive efficiencies through something like artificial intelligence, which requires a lot of data to learn about the real world. Yeah, I think that's
Thanks, Tanya. Tanya, a question I guess I should have started with is machine learning. How is machine learning and artificial intelligence related?
Oh my gosh, I think...
I know, yeah. I mean, just at a fundamental level, how do the two intersect there?
I guess machine learning is a term that kind of describes that the computer is trying to learn about the real world, right? So computers fundamentally, they understand things in the terms of ones and zeros. They don't really understand, what is a car, what is a bike, what is a human, anything like that. So machine learning is really our way of trying to help a computer learn how to understand what we learn and what we learn as a baby or what we learn as a person. Artificial intelligence in general is maybe just there's a lot of different forms of artificial intelligence. So maybe there's forms like, you might think of things like a chatbot that you might see on a website or something. It could be very much just a top-level approach where it does some kind of lookup or looks for some kind of data and then gives you a response back. It's maybe not necessarily learning as it goes. It's kind of just looking at existing information and understanding it through that kind of process. At least that's my understanding anyway. So. My co-founder Adrian is in the room, who is an AI wizard, and he is our, leading AI expert. So if you have any further questions about that, you can always ask him in the drinks time afterwards.
Where's Adrian?
He's at the back.
Good on, mate. You may be singled out later.
Hopefully that sort of answers the question, I think.
That's great. That's great, Tanya. No, thank you very much. Ben, I've got a question of you. You've had a lot of experience in citrus, and I've mentioned earlier, your family's orchard was taken over by Costa, and Costa's a big company, ASX listed, and of course it has a big reliance on technology there. Can I ask, how is agtech, technology in the agriculture area, how does that influence the way that Costa grows, packs, and markets citrus products?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting journey to be a part of, because we're the largest citrus grower, packer, and marketer in Australia, and that comes with its own challenges. And it's also one business unit of about 6 or 7 pillar categories. So we're pretty much category leaders in mushrooms, in tomatoes. So we grow 45% of the country's mushrooms, half of the blueberries of the country, quarter of the avocados, bananas, grapes. We're the biggest horticultural enterprise in the country. And believe it or not, we operate as about 7 separate business units. We all have our own software, we all do our own thing. And we've just appointed a Chief Information Officer, and there's a real drive to kind of break through the silos that have occurred within the business in all of these different business units that have started off with an acquisition and then another acquisition, and then all of a sudden, we own all this citrus stuff, or we own all these blueberry farms, and they like their software, then they collect all their data, and you sort of think, well, where does it go? Who's looking at this? How is it all integrating? And so I learned a term the other day that our guys call the data lake. So we've effectively built our own data centre, and we're collecting these huge, like terabytes of data, because literally in produce now it's very automated. So there's a lot of visual inspections like you're talking about. So we have compact machines in Renmark and Mertho here, recently acquired by the Tomra Group, and these guys do everything from sorting potato chips, almonds, garbage, recycling. So all of a sudden, you've got these companies that are international, are engineering things like reverse vending machines. Take your bottles to the supermarket in Europe, tip them in the machine, and it sorts all the bottles and glass out, but it does it visually by reading different cues on those bottles. These are the same companies that are supplying the sorting technology for our sheds. So there already is machine learning in there and AI, where we effectively call out defects on the fruit. We highlight it, and we literally, as simple as clicking a learn button, and it keeps looking for that. It's like when your phone suggests, is this Ben Kent? Is this Ben Kent? You say yes, no, and it dials in that face on those algorithms on your photo stream. It's the same sort of thing. Is this a hole in an orange? Is this a long stem? Is this a blemish? You keep teaching it enough times, and just like a baby, it slowly learns. So AgTech, with us being a vertically integrated business, particularly in all our categories, but citrus specifically, if I were to talk about that, AgTech's kind of really changing the way that we view and the way that we grow citrus and packet and market it. And it's all about, I guess, creating opportunities for intervention and optimization. So, you know, it's easy to get caught up in the buzz and say, oh, well, if we had drones and swarms and we could do this and we could do that. The reality is that, like the guys have said, oh, geez, no mobile reception, or, you know, this technology's slow, or this app, I can't understand it. You know, we've got an older workforce, not university educated in the main. So, you know, they're not tech savvy to a large degree. They need grassroots technology that works, that's reliable, and is in plain English. The smartphone's been a great thing. There's been some great innovations, like, so for example, in the growing space, we used to look at moisture monitoring, and our business was one of the original businesses that imported EnviroScan technology. So we had moisture monitoring probes that went down a couple of metres in the soil, and we were measuring the hydrology of the soil and kind of making some assumptions on what the trees needed based on that. In the last 5 years, really, that's old now. And I mean, I remember thinking, wow, this is cutting edge. Now we've got dendrometers, which is basically a set of calipers on the trees. We're measuring sap flow, so we're looking at trunk expansion. So rather than assuming what we think the trees are thinking, we're actually monitoring what they are doing and then matching the water to suit those needs. So all of a sudden, we're not as fussed about soil moisture, and we're actually able to do things like provide a light moisture stress on the trees to increase their ability to handle hot days. And for us, a commercial advantage is we're able to increase the sugar levels in our fruit, so we're 1 Brix degree in front of our competition by this light stressing. Now, it's very cutting edge. Like, you go a little bit too far and citrus trees let go of all their fruit. So you've got to be super careful when you do. It's high stakes stuff, but with the right instruments, we can do it. So there, from further on in our supply chain, we're obviously we're packing in excess of 100,000 tonnes of citrus every year and increasing. That'll be 200,000 tonnes in the next 5 years. Now, citrus is one of those games where if you make the grade 1 and you've got clean fruit, you make money. Anything below that, you make nothing on. Like, even the juice company, they don't pay you much for anything. So it's all about getting a marketable product at the end. So what we call pack out optimization is really key to profitability. So those, with the help of the AI in the machines, we're analysing the streams of fruit coming in, and then looking and, I guess, reflecting on, okay, well, how does that match up with what our crop analysis data is, which we're starting to do with drones now, and calibrating those algorithms, and then how that flows through to the marketing with, you know, really high-level financial analysis. We have international supply chains. We ship 3,000 40-foot containers of citrus every year to 32 different countries, and it all costs a different amount, and there's different box sizes and you name it. So it's, you know, I downloaded a spreadsheet the other day. It was 50 megabytes for an Excel file, and it nearly crashed my laptop. But this is the sort of data that we're dealing with, and so we're pushing back to our tech guys saying, how can you break down all of these silos, all of the grader data, the farm data, the sales data, and actually make that in a dashboard, if you will, where we can pull different levers up and down and war game some of these scenarios to see where the best financial analysis is. So I guess the answer is AgTech is fundamentally changing the way that we grow citrus.
Ben, can I ask a follow-on question to that? So Costa is a big company, and of course, it's got the resources to invest in technology there. You know, your family business, it wasn't a Costa originally. It was acquired by Costa, and so, you know, it would have been it was a family-owned business. And can I ask, to what is there room for technology, the use of technology in small agricultural businesses there? I mean, cost has got to be a major consideration there, but can you be smart at all? And I know that this is a question we hadn't talked about beforehand, but I'm just interested Ben.
You know the analogy, or you know when you see on TV and there's a shark swimming through the water, and quite often there's little fish that swim alongside the shark. I'll use that analogy because corporates tend to drive innovation through necessity, because we can't send dad out on the tractor all Sunday spraying weeds. Like, we've got a commercial cost to everything we do. So we drive efficiency in that respect.
Yes.
And also because of our economy of scale, we can have computer guys getting paid, God knows how much, sitting in our Melbourne office writing programs and, in between playing Call of Duty. During their workday, I don't know what goes on in that room, but, so we drive that efficiency, but quite often what we're finding is that the companies that we bring along on that journey, those service providers, that they will, obviously if we're investing and creating that technology in partnership with them, we might have an exclusivity agreement for a year or so, but really nothing ever lasts with that. And then that technology gets adopted by the wider market.
Yes.
So for sure, I'm sitting here getting chills and PTSD while you guys are talking about technology implementation failures.
Yeah.
I'm probably $100,000+ poorer for technology fails that we tried implementing in our family business. But we still get that in Costa, but like you said, fail fast, fail cheap, and be very narrow with your focus about what you want to try and achieve. But we'll lead the way, and there's certainly plenty of room for other businesses to come along with us, both as grower suppliers or as just friendly competitors, I guess.
Yes. I guess it's about growing the pie, trying to try to help others, smaller organisations, companies, businesses, and that to grow, and then everyone's going to benefit from that.
That's right.
No, thank you. Thanks, Ben. Sarah, could I come back to you there? If we can pass the mic. So you're Chief Commercial Officer for Cilium Technologies, which is an expert in the AI area. Ben's been talking about citrus. Can we move to viticulture? Because I know there's a number of people streaming, and I think there may be one or two in the audience as well who are interested in viticulture. How is AI, how does artificial intelligence, how is that changing the viticulture landscape? How is it having an impact upon that landscape?
Sure, thanks, Noel. I guess as everyone's aware, there's that pressure to do more with less. We're having all these extreme weather events, which is putting even more pressure on businesses, flooding, fires, drought. And then in parallel, we've got advances in technology. And as we know, as technology gets more and more advanced, the economies of scale kicks in, it becomes more affordable. And I guess something that might be of interest to everybody is a case study we did a few years ago where we worked with Wine Australia. So in the past, Wine Australia have conducted the national census of vineyards. Some people in the audience may remember doing the paper-based survey. Survey fatigue is a big issue, only about a 20% response rate. It's time-consuming. It's usually done by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Went from being annually to every other year to not being able to be done the year that the marriage equality survey was taking place. So Wine Australia put out a tender and we applied for it. And what we noticed was, due to those advances in technology, we saw machine learning being combined with cloud computing, and then also the use of high-resolution satellite imagery. And to be fair, we'd actually seen this be applied in the defence space, and we saw an opportunity to apply that to agriculture and viticulture in particular. And so what we did is, rather than surveying growers with the paper-based survey, we removed that burden and we used the satellite imagery and we trained machine learning algorithms to basically, down to the pixel level, determine, is this a vineyard? Yes, no. Now, the data scientists and machine learning experts will tell me crudely simplified that, but basically what we were able to do is over Australia, and this was a world first, it hadn't been done anywhere in the world, identify where all the vineyards were in Australia down to the vine row level. And we did a few simple calculations and we worked out to get that level of detail for someone to do that manually would take 200 years. So not only did you get that efficiency, but then also we're able to now know where those vineyards were located, which we previously hadn't. We're now seeing that a lot of technologies are they're useful on their own, but the challenge for a lot of growers and winemakers is they've got all these different tools at their fingertips, but the plumbing's not quite there. They're still having to make decisions, looking at one tool or application, looking at another. So something that we're trying to do now is combine the high-resolution satellite imagery to get your monitoring of your vineyards and then combining that with different data sources. So whether it's your soil moisture monitoring, whether it's your weather stations, and starting to make it easier so that the grower isn't left wondering what should they do. They know this, they know that, and making those simple dashboards to make it easier.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you very much. Tanya, maybe we've heard about using AI in viticulture, and Ben's talked generally about ag tech in citrus and other related areas, but if you could give us some other examples of how AI could be used in the agriculture area there. And also, how can this sector, various sectors prepare for the use of AI? It just seems to me that artificial intelligence it's already here, has been with us for some time, and it's just going to grow and grow and grow. But some businesses still aren't embracing this. Like I'm involved in an accounting firm, and some of the stuff that we used to do manually to advise our clients, we now use AI in terms of interpreting balance sheets and profit and loss statements and so on, cash flow statements. We don't do that anymore because the machines can do it better for us. So can you give us some other examples of how artificial intelligence could, can be used in other sectors? Yeah.
Sure. Maybe it's also good to sort of take a step back once again and just sort of what can AI be used for in general? So there's a lot of different things that AI can do. So it can count things, can classify things or identify things. It can segment things out, so it can sort of tell you from an image what is a car, what is a horse, what is a person. It can also be used to generate content, and it can also be used to make predictions. So this is kind of what Ben was talking about forecasting and predictions. So, I guess maybe I could sort of talk to you about something that I know well, which is Adrian and I, we started last year in the E-Challenge with our business HoneySense. And basically what we did for that was we went and spoke to a lot of apiarists about the kind of problems that they're facing currently. One of the key things they mentioned to us was that they have to do a lot of work, but then the honey doesn't actually sell for a lot of money. So they're wondering how they can increase the value of this product. And so we looked into kind of how do you increase the value of a product like honey. And there was a few examples around the world, but also there's one in Western Australia where basically what they did is they authenticated honey by provenance, which means they sort of tried to tell where honey's come from, and they use that as a way of value adding, because what you'll see is a lot of external markets, when they want to purchase a high value product, they want to have a bit of a story and a history behind it. So what we decided to do for HoneySense was we worked on a test called pollen analysis, and basically what you do there is you identify the different pollen grains in the honey, and you can then tell which flower it's come from and which region it's come from. And this is, something that we applied machine learning to, artificial intelligence. And so we developed a platform that's a software as a service platform, artificial intelligence, that automatically counts and classifies pollen and honey samples. And this was usually done by a highly trained scientist with a PhD, and they'd sit there with a microscope and they'd get a sore back and their eyes would hurt, and they'd sit there for hours, sometimes days, like manually writing in their notebook when they saw a pollen and what kind of pollen type it was. And what we found was with our software, we could do this instantly, basically. So we could not only count and classify everything in the image for them instantly, but we could also auto-generate a report for them, so they didn't have to then go write a report afterwards. So that's just one example, but through the journey and process of talking to these apiarists, we found just even in the honey sector and the bee sector alone, there's just so many different examples of where AI can be used. So you could use AI for monitoring hive health for apiarists, or you could use it, for example, for, we spoke to some almond growers here in the region actually, who mentioned that they often have apiarists come and leave their bees to pollinate their flowers. And what they really wanted to do was they wanted to identify what times of the day and for how long bees are actually out active and pollinating their flowers. So you could potentially use the monitoring technology to sort of identify when bees are leaving a hive and coming back, and sort of you get some kind of measure about how long you're getting pollination for, and therefore you could potentially predict what your kind of yield would be in that year. But there's so many different things in different regions, it's really hard to kind of pick and choose. We've spoken to so many people, we've spoken to people in dairy who, there are now technologies where they're using it in dairy to auto-identify mastitis in milk samples, and all sorts of different things. And we've, there's a lot of different areas. So one of the ones that we focused on for our business, obviously, is traceability and authentication. And in that sector alone, we've been speaking to people who are interested in using it for tuna grading and also just tuna analysis. So identifying bluefin versus yellowfin tuna, which is really hard to do visually, but potentially you could do that with artificial intelligence. Truffles, grading truffles. There's all sorts of different high-value produce that you could potentially get a better authentication and traceability measure by using artificial intelligence and using the visual inspection data that you can get from that. And as Ben mentioned, obviously at Costa Group and what he does, there's a lot of work in fruits, vegetables, those kinds of things to do grading and sorting. But that could also potentially be extended into grains, pasture seeds, grasses. There's a lot of different areas that haven't really fully adopted that kind of technologies, where those kind of can be expanded into those regions. And I think also there might be someone from local council in the room, and maybe this is not related necessarily specifically to ag tech, but also to just regions in general. My co-founder Adrian's dad has worked on the Campbelltown Council for 25 years, and recently we went and had a meeting with them to sort of talk about, how could artificial intelligence be applied even to a local council area. And there's a few different things that they picked up. So there's a few areas where, for example, line marking is something that takes them a lot of time. Usually someone has to look at a Google map and they've got to try to figure out where the lines are, measure them, and sort of get an estimate of, how many lines need to be marked in a year. Or, another thing that they're really interested in is identifying different trees. So where are trees? What are really important trees? For people that try to put applications in to want to build some kind of extension on their home, you could use, satellite or drone footage to identify where a really critical tree is in an area, and then have some kind of map of that and use artificial intelligence to tell you, no, they shouldn't be building in this area because there's a critical tree there. So there's just so many different areas that you could apply artificial intelligence to. It's almost limitless. It's really down to your imagination, I think, and this is where innovation comes in, and this is where, like Noel was saying about how local growers and, people in regions where you've had to go through a lot of hardship to try and get yourself from A to B in your business, your creativity is your limit, basically. So you can probably think of a million different things where you could apply technologies like AI and just technology in general to really drive efficiencies and improve your business.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tanya. Ben, can I, while the mic's down that end, I meant to ask you this beforehand. So with the citrus industry, where do you see that in the next 10 to 20 years? And what role will technology play in taking the citrus industry forward? And I guess there can be parallels in other industries as well, but the citrus industry in particular.
So, one thing we haven't automated yet, there's obviously a lot of work's gone into automating the sorting machines. We're putting robotics. We've got robotics here, so we don't stack very many boxes by hand anymore. That was one of my favourite childhood jobs in the packing shed. And so, robotic packing pretty much from start to finish. We still haven't cracked the nut around robotic picking yet. And that's because potentially it's a highly variable environment. You've got mounds and soil up and down. We are doing some trials which we're taking a leaf out of the book from, say, the apple industry, etc., where if you build an orchard on, say, a two-dimensional plane, then it actually gets a lot easier to robotically harvest. Citrus by its very nature grows three-dimensionally, so we're trying to trellis trees, and that'll sort of, I guess, pave the way for robotics out in the orchard. So that's probably one thing. We've gone through a huge, market access boom as far as China's concerned and Japan. And the citrus industry's gone from 150 million in exports to 500 million in exports in about 7 years. So it's it's tripled, which has been fantastic for the region. China's been a big piece of that. There's still going to continue to be growth there, and so we're still going to be a very export-focused industry. The challenge we have there is that we come up against Chile and South Africa as our main competition, probably similar to the wine industry and a few other industries. So low-cost base producers, slightly inferior product, and I emphasise the slightly. They are improving their growing practices and they're putting us on notice. We're the ones who've got things to lose and they've got everything to gain. So we're seeing our competition rearing up behind us, and so look, we're pushing into new markets, we're adopting technology where we can, robotics wherever we can, improving our efficiencies. Like I mentioned earlier, we're doing the regulated deficit irrigation, so we're starving the trees of water just enough to increase our sugar. That's a point of difference, but hey, it's also saving us a megalitre or two of water every hectare as well, so it's a win-win. Look, I think we're going to continue on that plane, as well as, look, we've seen a little bit of varietal development around seedlessness, consumer preference for easy peel fruit with no seeds in it. But you know, that still remains to be seen. People still love a good old humble Aussie orange, and mandarins will still be there as well. So they're two different segments that we're going to continue to supply. And I guess the other thing we're looking at is the robotic sprayers. There's some pretty cool gear coming out of the US from companies like Gus, and I think they're deployed in almonds already. And so we're just, it sounds bad, we're eliminating jobs, but what we're trying to do is create new jobs that are more highly skilled. So when people come to the region, they're not labourers, they're long-term career professionals with IT experience, and that's a far more sustainable employment as far as we're concerned.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you. I've just got two more questions, and I'll open it up for discussion. But the next one, Manjula, could I ask you a question, mate? The question is, what opportunities do we have to increase technology adoption? What are the opportunities there for us to buy in?
Before I talk about opportunities, I think I should just explain technology can be dangerous as well. I'll explain to you why. If you look at the knife, if you look at fire, if it's used the wrong way, of course it can be used for a harmful purpose, right? So what is important is we should understand what are the questions we should be asking before we adopt any technology, so that we understand the associated risks, associated liabilities. Having said that, technology is something not any one of us could deny, could reject and say, we are not going to adopt. Because if you look at any of the experiences we have had for the day or had for the past couple of months, what you will see is over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years, because of technology advancements, our experiences have changed. The way we go to the bank, the way we book a hotel, the way we get a taxi or whatever, it has changed because of technology. So I think it's an uphill battle to resist technology. However, as I said, there are two different, when we did our study, we clearly see there are two different, camps. One is the business owner who is making use of technology, and the other camp is the technology provider who is making the technology accessible to the business owner. Now, would that mean each and every business owner should be jumping ahead and try to learn whether it's AI or apps or whatever? I don't think that can be done, but I think, I would want my heart surgeon to do my heart operation because he's had enough time to invest, learn about it, so on and so forth. However, for every advanced technology that comes to the market, there's a 1-to-5 ratio of intermediate jobs that needs to be created in order to make the adoption a reality. So if you look at it from Australian perspective, where the export you are talking about, I think we are looking at least a 10% increase of the exports in South Australia as well as across Australia because of technology. So the technologies that we develop should not only be looked at to be exported around the world, but the technology should contribute, facilitate the existing businesses, whether it's a grower or otherwise, in order to at least get a 10% growth. So that is a big opportunity, and the intermediaries will be creating new jobs. As Ben was rightly saying, it is reskilling and upskilling and offering new jobs, the jobs we have not heard of, right? For instance, with technology always there are new problems that need to be solved, and that is the new job I'm talking about. Drone navigation was never a problem until drones were made available and accessible, right? She was talking about satellite imagery, and South Australia is going to be the hub for space, right? The satellite imagery is related to space. Now, who would think 10 years, 20 years back, a grower will be benefited from rocket science? And that is what is happening. That is the opportunity for the future. And more importantly, there is a concept of, we have always heard of brain drain, but what the young generation wants, those who are familiar with, those who are getting highly excited about the new toys, right? They love technology, and we have to use technology with these upcoming generations, whether it's at schools level or the university level. This talent loves technology, they embrace technology, they know that language better. So the opportunity is to, we call it multi-generational entrepreneurship, to let the ones who will do it better to take care of the problems they can solve, and then to create a better communication strategy with those who have run and embraced and know the contextual information, right, in those different regions, different industries. So we have to enable a better communication strategy between those who can offer technology and those who are running the, businesses that are fueling the economy of the country. So once this marriage can be, made a reality, I think it's a great opportunity to take the economy of South Australia to the next level.
Thank you, Manjula. That was great. I've just got one last question, and this may be a little bit left field, but it struck me that with COVID, getting products from a supplier to a customer, whether it's from farm to plate to glass. We had some major problems with COVID in some areas where our supply chains were interrupted, and often supply chains were, managed locally and optimised locally, but and not sometimes seen from a system point of view, from an holistic point of view. And so, Grant, I have a question of you, mate. With your software background and that, can I ask how, from a supply chain perspective, how is software changing, the landscape there, to not just integrating, but synchronising supply chains?
Yes. Again, another broad topic. And I'll pick up the word that Ben used, I think. Within the Costa Group, they've got what's called information silos. And I guess, if you think of a real-world silo, whatever is in the silo, let's call it grain, is in there and it's locked in there, and nothing sort of exchanges between the silo next door. And a silo makes sense because someone has got hold of that grain, they own that grain, it's in storage in that structure. Data is not the same. Data can actually be replicated. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of different owners to the data, and yet every single person along the supply chain can make use of that. As a matter of fact, if we go back to paper, often data was duplicated even at that point, because everyone knows what a 3-colour, 4-colour, however many colour dockets you need, and everyone gets to kind of keep a copy. And then at the end, maybe a month down the track, everyone sort of compares notes and says, do we line up? Are we the same? Are we keeping each other honest? But the key is when you start thinking of that, in terms of a supply chain, in terms of moving something from a product from the origin, from the ground, wherever it's harvested, maybe there's a harvest operator there, then it goes into a haulage operation, from haulage to maybe some processing in between into a final customer by the end of it. And yet every single person is interested in that data. As a matter of fact, as we go into, especially with haulage of materials, heavy truck legislation and things like that, there is actually now everyone is responsible for what happens along that chain. And there's no point in sort of waiting a month down the track to compare the paperwork, because you never ever find out that something is going wrong, and yet everyone is immediately responsible for it. And so the key is, what is happening is there is a movement away from a siloed data ownership where it's the customer that rules the data, or maybe it's the supplier that rules the data. Instead, what is happening is that each of the data sources can add to a central sort of data. Maybe it's centralized or maybe it's duplicated. It doesn't matter as long as it happens in a synchronous sense, whereby that person adds more information to it, everyone gets access to that. The next group along adds more information to that, and then everyone benefits from that. And you can do things in real time. It's a benefit to the growers because they understand how they need to meet the contracts that they have. It's a benefit to the haulers because they understand whether or not they need to add more trucks or remove more trucks, or whether or not something has gone wrong. And then it goes to the end. And to pick up the point, as soon as we get that sort of automation of data, there's a lot of other things that all of a sudden become possible to the group. One of the things that the group down in the Green Triangle region did, a number of different suppliers, I might add that it's very networked as well. Like everyone uses each other's haulers, everyone buys from each other, and wood just flies all over the place. So even that perspective, having the ability for each of these systems to talk to each other, where they're not logging into that group's database or system and then logging into that one as well and having 3 or 4 different logins. They're kind of logging into one single app interface and sharing the data within the ecosystem. And the group identified, from a COVID perspective, they wanted to keep the truck drivers in their trucks when they drove over the weighbridges and not go out to terminals to be able to program in the details of the docket, of the product that's coming in. And so now information goes from the supply through, shared with the hauler, immediately to the point where it's going to be weighed. They know that that's truck's on its way. They arrive on it, automated camera detects the number plate, and then they don't even need to get out of the vehicle. It immediately gives the driver a copy of the information so they're not walking out empty-handed, and the information is now shared instantaneously from the weighbridge, the customer record, to the supplier record. And these systems aren't all owned by the same company, but they're also not all owned by the same vendor. So the vendors themselves, like an enabled with our logger product, is just one of the vendors, and we share information across between ourselves and Trimble Logistics and a few other players like that, because we understand the benefit to the supply chain of that data going backwards and forwards. And I guess one of the key things as you go forward in sort of thinking about this is, yes, you can get together and you can also engage as a group as well, like they did, to be able to solve that weighbridge problem. But one of the key things that I just want to leave you with, and it's a keyword and it doesn't mean a lot, but think about the interconnectivity of applications, and that is done through what we call APIs. And so if you're thinking about taking on a piece of software, just either if you're getting some help, just make sure it's got what we call APIs or an integration pathway. So that means that makes it easier for almost any old software developer to come along and under instruction say, yes, that software has an API, that software has an API. I know how to get those two applications talking together. And that enables then that exchange of information to go around. And then you get that synchronization as opposed to some sort of lag as an Excel spreadsheet gets emailed to someone and eventually they digest and put it in, which like I said back at the beginning, that's a good place to start, but eventually the sophistication can get to this ecosystem approach. Well, yeah. Well, it's still an amazing system like global delivery and supply chain, and it's quite, there's a lot of maturity with what happens within global supply chains, but within industry supply chains at a local level, it's only just emerging really on what we can do in terms of getting these systems talking to each other.
Thank you. Thanks, Grant. Look, I'm just checking the time, and we're just about out. We're over time at the moment, but maybe 1 or 2 questions we can handle. And there's some live stream questions there as well. But if you have a question, you don't get a chance to answer it, the panel will be staying around a little later, so you can ask them in person if you like, or send them an email. We can give you the details. And if you're streaming, of course, and you don't get your question answered, then please send them to us. I think Eloise has got some, and we can pass them on, and you'll get a response. But first up, can I ask the audience here, are there any questions here? Yeah, go to the live stream, yeah.
Right, we have a question from Dion. I don't know, there might be even someone in this room that can answer this as well. Are there community services, agencies or organisations that can guide and consult with local business owners to identify potential transformation strategy? And on the back of that, he said, locals in regional areas, such as irrigators and farmers, may not realise what potential improvements to workflows and technology currently exist to benefit their businesses.
That's a good question. Yeah, a good question.
So we actually identified this problem in mining, and we're rolling it out as an organisation, and we're calling it AI discovery. So often a business may be aware of one challenge they're facing. What they may not realise is all this other low-hanging fruit where potentially they could actually, for that same amount of money, solve a number of problems as opposed to, say, one very large, expensive problem. And so what this AI discovery involves is looking at a business and understanding the context of how the business operates and those systems and processes, and then working out where are those decisions being made. So once you understand where the decision's being made, that's where then you can start to introduce the technology. So, for example, is the technology going to assist the operator to make a better, more informed decision? Is it an automated opportunity? And effectively, once we've worked through the organisation and identified some of that low-hanging fruit, you've more or less got a shopping list. So then, when the consulting happens, you can make an informed judgment call. Is this the best area of the business that we should be spending our resources and time and money? Or is there something else that we hadn't even thought of with that new, fresh set of eyes that we could be better focused on?
Yeah, every now and again you get to see some government-funded things. There was a digital champions thing funded by SA government that agencies like Enable took part in to be able to sort of coach and mentor businesses. So just keep a lookout for that. One thing that I might encourage people to do is to almost start just a little club or a little network themselves on it, because Google really is your friend here. It really is hard to find some sort of agency besides maybe some of the government small business things to be able to look at this. Really, you need to get together almost over a few beers, break out Google, and see what you come up with, because it's amazing the amount of things that are out there that you can come across that no individual sort of agency is really going to be able to do for you, because they don't know what your problems are. You know what your keywords are. So it's an interesting activity, and I've seen it work. It's just a different idea.
I think just playing off of that, like what we've noticed by talking to people is that, nobody knows your specific domain better than you do, right? So when you're talking to anybody, like if somebody came to us to approach us to build them an AI solution, the first thing we, really respect is that they know their domain best. So as, it was mentioned, perhaps getting together in that specific domain and then seeing what you come up with is a great idea.
One more? You got time for one more?
Thank you. Yeah, I've got one more on here. Bill, digital technologies are enablers, not drivers. Would you agree?
I think that's something that Adrian and I talk about a lot, is that, something like what we work with is AI, so I'm going to speak from that perspective. But everyone seems to think that artificial intelligence is like this fancy term. You just paint this paintbrush of AI over everything and it's going to solve every problem. But what we actually believe is that it's just an enabling tool or enabling technology. Really, you have to have the core function of a business before you can really enable things to have better efficiencies or in some kind of innovation in an area with a tool like AI. And I'm not sure if anyone else wants to add anything to that, but.
Yeah, I think from an enabling technology perspective, it will enable the existing businesses to be taken to the next level. For example, if the smartphone was not available as an enabler, we would have not talked of any apps. If internet was not available, we would have not had the ability to do the live streaming and connect. So definitely, technology is also always enabling new possibilities. We can understand new problems because of these enabling technologies. As I said earlier, the drone navigation would have never been talked of if we didn't have drones to be a reality. But having said that, always it is adding value to the existing practices. But then it creates new jobs and it transforms our lifestyle. And essentially what we're looking at is technology should be used to make the world a better place. Like the data Grant was talking about is very important. But let's be aware that you have to ask the question whenever you have data, who has access to my data? Right? Because if it goes to the wrong person, it could be not so good. So what is important is what are the right questions to be asked? As Grant said, sometimes we may not have all the answers. Even the technology providers may not have all the answers. But I think what is important is to have that conversation in and around technology. Then we will understand what would be the new problems that needs to be answered. That becomes an opportunity to someone who will put the hand up, try to find the solution.
Thanks. Yep, Grant?
Yeah, just a short one. I think we've sort of said it. If you're not, it's almost a semantic question really on what is an enabler versus a driver, but just bear in mind that if you're not using technology, it's a backwards movement today. So that's kind of the opposite of driving, isn't it? So is it an enabler, is it a driver? It doesn't matter. If you are using it, you have the opportunity to outpace anyone who is not.
Thank you, Grant. We maybe have time for one more question, Eloise. Anyone in the audience?
Anyone here? Yeah.
To Grant, you spoke about the data sharing information within a sector to improve supply chain. I'd just be interested to hear whether or not you think it might be possible between industry sectors and supply chain. So I'm thinking sort of, the grain industry with the beef industry. Just thoughts?
Aside from the massive amount of data that we might be talking about, which has some challenges in itself, of which the large platforms and things like that kind of know how to deal with. So technically it's possible. I guess it's more of the will and then identifying, like there's two aspects to sort of playing with data. One is determining what can just emerge by throwing sort of computational analysis or AI. Some things by correlation, patterns might emerge that we could spot if we had a million years, but the computers will be able to do that within a couple of weeks. And so that pattern matching could possibly yield some benefit. But otherwise, it's more of the case of, well, what key question, I think Manjula was talking about it, is what is the objective in mind? One is just to throw some stuff at it and, hey, let's see what comes out of this little the pot here we're stirring. But the other one is, well, what key objectives do we want to get out of it? And, maybe there are environmental concerns and things like that, where there is environmental impact concerns from many different industries, and there might be information within that we should be looking at as a society to determine what's happening. And at the moment, they might be in silos, and now we can get that back out and then play with it. But it's that, but it's also the will. Are everyone happy to play? Can they de-identify the data in a way where they don't feel like they're being compromised from a competition perspective? And there are conversations to be had. But I think if people can be encouraged to, then yeah, maybe there could be a shared data initiative that is struck up.
Thank you very much. Well, we're out of time, so if you have got a question in the audience here, please feel free to approach the panellists afterwards, and online, as I mentioned beforehand, if you're streaming, please send in your questions, and we'll endeavour to get those to the panel. But look, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great evening and a fantastic panel, a fantastic group of people with a range of different experiences there. Obviously, a lot of depth in various areas of technology, and I got a lot out of it, I've got to say myself. Can we please thank the panel there? Give them a round of applause, please. It's Yeah, it was great to hear from you. If I can just give a little plug for our Think Lab. So Think Lab Loxton, we're based in Loxton, but it is for the region, the Riverland, Murray region. It's fantastic to be here in Renmark, to reach out to Berry and other communities in the region here. And we're about driving innovation and helping to boost regional development in the area. And what we do is try to offer seminars like this where people can pick up knowledge on that, but we also have plans now to run hands-on workshops, programs there where people can get involved, and these will be free of charge there to help businesses and entrepreneurs in the region. Speaking of which, come June, mid-year, Think Lab Loxton will be established for around about 12 months there. And to mark this occasion, we're going to be announcing very soon a large innovation event that's going to take place in the region over a weekend in June. So watch this space, and it'll be very much interactive. So let me just wind up by saying it's been an absolute pleasure to be here in Renmark this evening. I thank you all for attending. Thank you very much. Some of you I know have come up from Adelaide, and some of our panellists, and others are local here, and others are from other communities around the place. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you too for those who have live streamed with us tonight. There's quite a handful there. Thank you again to our panellists, and thank you to PIRSA for making all this happen. We very much appreciate your support and supporting Think Lab. And can I say also, it wouldn't have happened without two ladies down the back, Zrinka and Eloise there, who do all the hard work behind the scenes there to make it happen. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's the end of the formal proceedings. But if you're here, please hang around. Feel free to stay around. Talk to the panellists if you have any questions. The bar will be open in a minute, and we'll be serving some hot food. You can have a drink from there, and or some tea or coffee if you like as well. So thank you very much, and if you're travelling, safe travels home. Thank you very much.